Guys, we're jumping right into this episode. I've got JP Richardson with Exodus here today on the show. Thanks for coming on, bro.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
This is awesome. Bring this bad boy a little bit closer to your face, and you can pull it back and everything.
Okay.
So I want to start from the very beginning. I want your origin story first, and then what I want to do is I want to use this as like an educational opportunity for people who know nothing about crypto.
Yeah.
They're curious about the space. So let's start off with your origin story, your comic book number one, if you will, for how you got into crypto and Exodus.
Okay. Yeah. So crypto for me, the way that I got into it is I wanted to build an e-commerce site to sell. I think it was like some data or something like that. And I was thinking, I'm like, okay, I'm going to set up a store online and I'm going to sell this data and I'm going to create this massively successful business. It's going to be great. Mm-hmm. And so then I went down the path of looking oh, well, how do I actually get people's money all across the world? What do I have to actually do to make that happen? And so I went to PayPal and I set up for a merchant account and Stripe and all these different things. And I realized PayPal's we'll get back to you in 2 weeks or whatever. I'm like, wait a second, 2 weeks, really? I want to get started today, right? As an entrepreneur, you want to move fast, right? Mm-hmm. And I was looking around there's got to be better ways. And that's about the time that I discovered Bitcoin. And this was back about early 2011.
2011.
Yeah.
You're discovering Bitcoin in 2011.
Yeah.
I'm graduating high school at this time and you're discovering Bitcoin. I didn't know. I didn't even think that word entered my stratosphere at that point. So 2011 you discover it.
Yeah. 2011 is when I discovered it. I hadn't purchased yet, but I discovered it. I'm like, wait a second. So I can take money from anybody in the world and I can just do it online. And I can do it in a matter of just less than a couple hours or something like that. Yeah. That's game changing. And so what actually happened is I didn't actually end up setting up the business. I ended up just falling down the rabbit hole of reading all about Bitcoin and the technology and what it could mean for society. And that's what really got me into Bitcoin. And at this moment in time, I had a day job as an engineer at a biotech company here locally. And I was just paying attention to Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. And it was about 2012 where I decided I've got to do something about this. I've got to figure out how to contribute to this ecosystem and what I can actually build and do. And so I was thinking, well, how do I do that? What do I got to do? And I'm like, well, at this moment in time, it's hard. This is back 2012. There was not easy software to use Bitcoin. Mm. And so I'm like, that's probably where I should start. And fortunately, I had moonlighted other startups, and I sold another startup back in, this may have been 2010 timeframe.
And what'd you do in that startup?
That was I built sports apps.
Oh, okay.
So imagine an app for Nebraska, right? So you'd have your roster, you would have your scores, you'd have news. And so then I did that for every college football team. And so I started, that's how I started with two friends locally, and that's where we started.
Awesome.
And so I had some capital saved away so that I knew that someday when I wanted to go out on my own and build this big successful business, that I would be able to do it with some capital. Mm-hmm. And so it was 2012 when I decided this. I'm like, okay, I'm going to build a mobile wallet to store Bitcoin. And for a lot of people that may not know, a wallet is essentially a way for a person to view their balance, send Bitcoin, or receive Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. And a mobile wallet there wasn't a mobile Bitcoin wallet at this moment in time. That was...
So no Coinbase, nothing even along those lines.
Coinbase, they were I think just getting started around that time. Mm-hmm. And so I was building up my mobile wallet, and I quit my job in February of 2014 to go full time on this. Mm-hmm. And the name of the company that I chose at this for this mobile wallet, it was Coinbolt, And because you know, at that time you would prefix every company name with coin, kind of like early days internet, eBay. Yeah. So it was like coin was what you did to say like, hey, I'm a Bitcoin or cryptocurrency company. And so I'm like Coinbolt, and Bolt kind of brings along with it kind of a connotation of speed and security, like, you know, Bolt lock or whatever. So Coinbolt was the name. It was just me. And I was building it, and it was fine, and I was releasing on iOS and Android, and it was okay. But one of the turning points for me was when I was out in Silicon Valley, and I was pitching Coinbolt to people. I was just, you know, I was at a Bitcoin meetup. I'm like, yeah, check out this mobile wallet. It's really cool. I built it. It's simple. And this person comes up to me and he says, JP, I got to let you know that Coinbolt looks like a 5-year-old designed it. And I'm like,
all back end.
My gosh. And I sound like, you're right. It does. It looks terrible. It looks absolutely terrible. And that's when I realized, like, I have an engineering background, but I don't have the design chops. And Coinbolt became a massive failure. It was a massive failure.
And you're on all the app stores, Google Play, iOS. It was out there for people to download it.
There were some issues at this time too with the Apple App Store allowing Bitcoin wallets in the first place. Like, I think I got it. I snuck in for a bit and then I had to remove it. I don't fully remember, it was so long ago, but I remember at that moment in time, like, Apple's like, no cryptocurrency wallets in our store at all. And so that made it, I mean, obviously even more difficult,
right?
But it ended up just being a massive failure.
Okay, so what'd you do after that?
So I teamed up with Daniel Castagnoli, who he's built some businesses before, and he has design experience, design chops. And I remember, like, I had actually met him before we formally decided to do Exodus. And I just remember I was talking to him one day. I'm like, I knew he had a design background, and I had seen some of his designs. I'm like, your designs are really good. But I'm like, do you have the skills and capability to, like, turn your designs into a product like what we need with the HTML and all that good stuff? He's like, yeah, of course, man. Like, it's no problem. And I'm like, oh, well, I've got the coding chops. You've got the perfect design chops.
Let's do it.
And I thought, like, maybe we should build something. And around this time, this is now to 2015, around this time, there were a number of hacks in the cryptocurrency and Bitcoin space on exchanges. And so one of the biggest hacks, which took place in actually 2014, was Mt. Gox. And at that moment in time, it was roughly $500 million of Bitcoin that was stolen from Mt. Gox. And today that value equates to, I think it's the Bitcoin value today is like roughly, I don't know, like $10 billion or so.
Insane.
So it was
it actually in a mountain, like, hidden away, like servers and everything?
No. The name actually, it's kind of funny. The name it was repurposed from I think it was Magic the Gathering online exchange. So it was originally a site to trade Magic the Gathering cards.
Oh, of course.
And they pivoted to buying and selling and trading Bitcoin. So that's how it started. So people just call it Mt. Gox. Yeah, so nothing to do with
it's
Mount.
Funny you say like that it's Mount, though. The reason I brought that up is I watched a documentary on Prime the other day where there's like, I don't know how many billions of dollars worth of cold storage that's physically located inside of these servers, and it's buried inside of a mountain somewhere. Like, talking armed guards right outside of it.
Yeah, and there's a number of companies that do that. I think there's one in Switzerland that I think does something like that. But yeah, there's a number of companies that will secure your Bitcoin in that way and secure exchanges Bitcoin, because that's an important aspect, because of they don't want a repeat of what happened with
Mt. Gox.
Yeah, exactly.
That's funny.
Yeah. So it evolves too in this like 2014, 2015 timeframe. A number of different other coins were released: Litecoin, Ethereum, Namecoin, Dash. Like all these other coins started being released, and this ecosystem emerged of, like, people would like to buy these coins and just, like, have a portfolio of them. But to do that, you had to either do it on an exchange like a Mt. Gox and risk your money being stolen if it gets hacked, or if the exchange, the servers go down or whatever problems it would have. Or if you want to store a portfolio of cryptocurrency, you would have to download a wallet for each coin. So recall earlier I was talking about I just built a Bitcoin wallet.
Yeah.
And so you would have to download a Bitcoin wallet, you had to download a Litecoin wallet, a Namecoin wallet, and it was painful. And the wallets at that moment in time were real ugly, heavyweight, and it was just really painful. So we said, what if we could build software where we could make it super easy for a person to have a portfolio of cryptocurrency all within one software package? And even better, what if they could easily convert one to the other, swap one to the other? Could we have a successful business? Mm-hmm. And the answer to that is that today we have 2.4 million customers that use Exodus. So that's how it all started.
Yeah, that's so freaking cool. So what year was that when you basically wanted to create the portfolio wallet?
That was 2015.
2015.
Yes.
So people are, you're still so early at that point compared to when people, and what price was Bitcoin roughly? Do you remember 2015?
2015, let's see, Bitcoin was probably around that time anywhere from $200 to $300 or so.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So
then we saw massive spiking from like 16 on, right? Like that's when it started to get into the like 10,000.
Yeah. It from 2015 to 2016, it started to go up from $200 to $300, and that's a time frame that was interesting as well in my own life. Like in the 2015 time frame, I was starting to run out of money. Like this was getting bad. Like, and I had a 2000 Toyota Camry. It was gold, and we called her Goldie, and I loved her kind of like you would an old dog sort of thing, right. Just an old beat up car.
She'll be all right.
Yeah, she'll be all right. Yeah, and Goldie, this was 2015, the day after Thanksgiving, and Goldie is sitting out front of my house, and there's a bunch of ice on the road. And Goldie just gets my mother-in-law. She comes up, she knocks on the door. She's like, this is like, I don't know, 4 a.m. or something. She's like, JP, Leslie, my wife. I hate to tell you this, but someone hit your car. And at this moment, like I said, I had hardly any money.
Oh man.
And I was devastated. I went out. The person was, they stopped fortunately, and they're like, I'm sorry, I hit your car. And the front of Goldie just looked pretty beat up. And and then I'm like, oh well, that's pretty bad. And it's kind of funny because I just still let Goldie sit there. Later that afternoon, somebody hit my car again, and just like.
What do you think? What's going through your mind at this point?
What's going through my mind is that
I don't want to drive that. I'm going to get hit next.
What made me think is like Goldie is actually like the only thing that I really owned,
and it was taking massive hits.
It was taking massive hits, yeah. And I'm like, how am I ever going to get through that? Like, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
So what happened was, the insurance company completely totals the car out. It's still drivable, but totals the car out. They write me a check. And I'm like, well, wait a second. If I'm okay just driving Goldie looking terrible, then whatever. Like I got more money to survive.
Yes, you took the claim money.
Yes, I did not. I did. I took Goldie in to get some minor cosmetics, so it didn't look like really bad. But so I took the claim money. Instead of just getting a new car or anything like that, I still drove Goldie, and that money got me to the point where we had, I had like a small consulting engagement, but eventually it got me to, that money still propelled me to get to the point where we could raise money for Exodus in September of 2016.
Oh my gosh. And so you go from the dark night of the soul moment, you've got, cars taking multiple hits, no money in the bank account. And then the following year, you guys do your first raise. And how much was your first raise for?
It was $368,000.
Okay. So pretty small in terms of crypto then.
Well, no, 2016 though, keep in mind, 2016, like $368,000. I thought, I'm like, oh my gosh. Like, it's not going to be enough to, get us for years, but it will at least buy us maybe a year and a half to execute. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, today a $368,000 raise today is, for entrepreneurs, isn't much. Mm-hmm. But at that moment in time, like, that was...
You were so early still.
Yes, it was a lot.
And just the risk profile of what people believed about Bitcoin, very, very high risk at that point. I mean, sporadic, watching it take those huge jumps and then fall, massive falls right after that. And so they're all equating, at least I believe this is how investors were thinking at that time. They're equating a lot of it to the fact that, like, this is such an unstable industry. Mm-hmm. This whole entire thing is just a bubble waiting to pop. When in reality, you were over here selling pickaxes.
Yes.
The gold rush was happening. People were freaking out about Bitcoin, like gold back in California, but you were selling pickaxes.
We were selling pickaxes for what we saw the gold rush to come, because it didn't start yet. And you're right. And the narrative at that moment in time was that Bitcoin's for terrorist financing and evil
Silk
people.
Road.
Yeah, and people on drugs on on drugs on the internet. Like, that's what people thought about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. And so there was a lot of still fear surrounding it.
Mm-hmm. And so you take that money from your first raise and then talk about, like, just the growth from 2016 in September. You take that 368 grand. What happens after that growth? Clearly hockey stick moment there.
Yeah. So what was wild about all this is late 2016, we were making as a business maybe a few $100s a month. So, like, there was no I mean, we just got to, keep working on this product. There were, at that, let's see, it was just Daniel, myself, and then we had another contract developer. And it was February of 2017 where we made $3,000. And the way that a lot of people want to know, like, well, how do you make money? And the way that we make money is, as I mentioned earlier, if a person wants to convert or swap one coin to another coin, we get a piece of that. So we made $3,000 in February of 2017. And then March of 2017, we made about $70,000. And that's when I realized, like, oh, okay, like, what we believed earlier is going to play out to be true.
Yeah.
And so then the rest of the year, it just kept going and going and going. And I think, it just kept going. And when we closed out, like, the last month of the year, we made, like, I think it was like $1 million in 1 month. And we just thought that was incredible.
Talk about, like, a massive spark to fire moment, because the show's spark to fire. You literally had a moment where you're like, oh yeah, a couple $100s a month. And now you, like, end the year with doing over $1 million a month. And I think this is a super important note for people that are starting businesses. If you're going to build a business and you do desire something that is, like, that scalable and that, like, exciting, obviously there's going to be a lot of trial, tribulation. I mean, you went through a lot of different renditions, I'm sure, of product. I mean, all the risk that you were holding on to, but there's high risk, high reward, and you were absolutely putting yourself in a position for something you knew was coming. What made you so certain in 2011 and 2012? When you read the white paper, I'm guessing you read the white paper, the Bitcoin white paper that explains how the entire thing works. What made you so certain back then?
I don't think that there's ever, like, 100, like, I'm never like, oh my gosh, I'm 100% certain that this is going to play out the way that I think that it should play out. It was more or less that I think the world needs this. I need it. I built a product that I needed myself, but I also thought the world ultimately is going to need this. The world, and especially in the state of the world today, and we talk about this later in the podcast, but you see, like, with what happened within Canada, the Canadian government has weaponized the financial system against its people, right? And then you see unfortunately, with the Russian military invasion into Ukraine, which is just a horrific thing for that to happen, rightly or wrongly, the United States has weaponized the United States Western financial system against Russia.
Right.
And so it starts to introduce into people's minds, like, wait a second, this dollar that I have, this currency that I hold, what is the real value in this? And so kind of thinking about that fiat currency, currency of the governments, a lot of people have this misconception that it's backed. If you ask anybody today, you say, hey, what is the dollar backed by? And most people will tell you it's backed by gold.
Oh my gosh.
And it's because they don't know any better. And that's
right.
okay. They don't know any better. And we have to kind of educate them and get people to know. But knowing that as the world would play out, and knowing that central bankers, after watching 2008 and watching most of America saying, let them fail, let them fail, let them fail to all the bankers, let them fail. Let's take care of Main Street first, as opposed to Wall Street. And seeing that the U.S. government, both political parties, mind you, decided to say, we are going to bail out the bankers. We're going to put their needs before you and your needs, Main Street.
Yep. And
knowing that was a moment, that was a watershed moment, we're saying like, oh my gosh, the world needs something. The world needs this Bitcoin technology more than ever. And so it was a piece of like conviction for me that like, I've got to do this regardless of what, I just have to do it. I'm pulled to do this.
That is fascinating. What year did the white paper actually come out? Or when was it discovered, I should say?
Yeah. It was 2009.
Okay, so wow, right after that. So like in the midst or right after the massive financial crash of 2007, 2008.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, and people can infer from the inventor of Bitcoin, Satoshi Nakamoto, in one of the first early, what's called the Genesis block. It's the first block of the blockchain in Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. There's a message encoded in there that says, Chancellor, speaking of the UK Chancellor, on the brink of bailouts for banks. And so you can infer from that Satoshi's motivations for creating Bitcoin was to give people control of money and not central bankers.
I did not know that. That is fascinating. Mm-hmm. So I want to give people a little bit of context before we kind of dive into everything that blockchain is. We're going to start off very, very simple with just what is a blockchain. Mm-hmm. But before we do that, I want to give people some context, like what is Exodus doing exactly, and then talk about the size of what you've built. Like where did it go from that $368,000 to where are you today? And then we'll get into the fundamentals of Bitcoin to kind of educate people.
Sure, absolutely. So today, as I mentioned, we have 2.4 million customers, and we are a remote-only company. We started here in Nebraska, and knowing that we were going to build this great tech company in the future, we're like, well, how should a tech company be built? And so we thought, well, wait a second, let's start remote only. So we can get the best talent all over the world. And so we started with remote only pre-COVID. And we said to ourselves, like, we believe in this technology so much, let's actually pay salaries in Bitcoin. So we're one of the very few companies in the world that says, if you want to work at Exodus, you have to take your salary in Bitcoin. You don't have an option. You have to take it in Bitcoin. And so what that means, though, for a lot of people, they're like, well, wait a second. Does that mean that, a person's salary is like, 1 Bitcoin a year or 2 Bitcoins a year or 3 Bitcoins a year? No, the salary is actually denominated in dollars. So a person might have a salary, $75,000 or $100,000 or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. Bitcoin just becomes the medium of exchange to give them that salary. Mm-hmm. But the benefit of this is that we could hire anybody in the world and find the best talent all over the world. And so I was already active online in open source and software development. Mm-hmm. And I saw these developers online, and I could say, well, wow, this person's really good. And I could reach out to them like, hey, do you want, we're building this cool cryptocurrency wallet. Do you want to join us? Yeah, I would love to join. Great. Do you want to get started today? Yes, let's get started today. And I could just pay them in Bitcoin. And so that's kind of how we started with this. And so, like I said, we've grown the company now. We've just closed 2021 with $95.8 million in revenue from the 2.4 million customers that we have. And one of the great things that we did that a lot of people still don't know about is that in 2021, we were the first company in the United States, and to my knowledge, the world, to actually do a public offering of stock with cryptocurrency only, and have our stock, our common stock, digitally represented on a blockchain, all qualified by the SEC. So what this means is that you could, when this offering was live, it was live from April to May of 2021, a person could download Exodus and they could buy Exodus stock with either Bitcoin, Ethereum, or USDC. Mm-hmm. Only cryptocurrency. A person could not wire money. There was no ACH transfer. There was no credit card, just cryptocurrency. And so this was all done under what's called the SEC Regulation A offering. Mm-hmm. And so the maximum amount we could raise for that was $75 million. So we raised $75 million from that offering.
How long did that take?
It took about a month. Yeah, it took about a month.
Oh, $75 million in 1 month.
Yeah, it took about a month.
To make that right.
But I wanted it to happen in like a minute.
Yeah, and that's what's so interesting about this industry is that nothing is on normal timelines.
Right.
It's all accelerated.
This industry moves crazy fast.
Yeah.
So we did this offering, and now the stock, like I said, it's on the blockchain. It's on the Algorand blockchain. It's common stock. Anybody can buy the common stock through a site called t0.com. Mm-hmm. And like I said, there's no other company in the United States that can claim that they have their common stock digitally represented on a blockchain.
It's so freaking cool. Wow. So that should give people a lot of context to like who you're listening to. And I think that's really important. You know, when we take advice from, say, coaches, or we listen to people that claim to be experts in something, especially when they come on Spark to Fire, I want to make sure people know that like the expert is in the room. And so with that said, I want to dive into the fundamentals of blockchain and Web3, and we're just gonna like start there. And I guarantee you we're gonna hit time because we've got about 25 minutes left, and we're gonna hit our time, and then you're gonna come back on probably, and we're gonna like continue discussing these terms because you're just a wealth of knowledge for this. So let's start off with the very most basic level. Mm-hmm. What is a blockchain?
Okay, a blockchain is just simply a public ledger that cannot be changed. The history of it cannot be changed. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so a blockchain then allows a person anywhere in the world to participate by sending transactions. And so this allows it to be transparent for anybody in the world to see. It allows it to be what's referred to as permissionless. Like I don't have to go ask permission to submit a transaction on the Bitcoin blockchain. As long as I already hold Bitcoin, I can just do it, and I can transfer Bitcoin to anybody in the world. And it's what's also referred to as censorship resistant. What that means is that once my transaction is submitted on the blockchain, nobody can stop that from happening. So when you hear like a ledger can often sound like as a fancy word of like, well, what does a ledger really mean? It's just it's basically you can think of like a list of balances, really, of like who owns what.
A T-chart, like from when you're in middle school, a T-chart.
A T-chart.
A T-chart, like it's a cross, and then you've got numbers on either side, and like plus and minus on either side. Like if your bank, basically when you send currency to somebody, it goes minus from this and plus to over here, yes. And it's just the most basic level. It's keeping track of those transactions.
Yes. And so that's at a fundamental level of like what it is. The blockchain then just becomes like a mechanism to also secure all of these transactions and ensure that those properties of being censorship resistant, permissionless, transparent, immutable, cannot be changed, it exists.
Mm-hmm. And I heard this described as, so like when you have a block and you string a bunch of blocks of code together, that creates a blockchain. So what is it just ledgers, just tons of ledgers inside those blocks, or can you describe it on a more deeper level how that works?
Yes. So when I submit a transaction to the Bitcoin blockchain, what's happening is there's a bunch of different software called nodes all around the world. And a node is essentially, you can think of it as a software package or a piece of software that somebody's running on their computer. And so if I submit it to one of them, like say a wallet already has its own node. So I submit it to my wallet's node. And then as a consumer of this technology, I don't have to think much about it. It's like, I'm going to pay this address, this amount of Bitcoin. I don't have to think about how this works. But effectively what's happening is the wallet has a node, and then it spreads it all out to all the other nodes in the world, and they all talk to each other, and this is often referred to as they gossip with each other. And then so every node then knows like, oh, this was this transaction that this person submitted. Now there's another group of actors in this story, and those are miners. And so the miners will come along, and what they do is they take a number of different transactions and they sort them by fees. So the ones that have the highest fees, they take first, because the fees that's how they get paid, along with what's called a block reward. And so the miners then take all these transactions and they are limited by a certain size. So historically, that was 1 megabyte on the Bitcoin blockchain. And so they would bundle all of those up. And it's a little bit more than that today, but they would bundle all of those up.
It's pieces of code, right? And this is a transaction.
Yes, all these transactions, they bundle all these transactions up into what's called a block. And then they would solve a mathematical puzzle called proof of work and then the first miner that solves that puzzle, it's a race. The first miner that solves that puzzle can then broadcast to all the nodes and the whole entire network, say, I've won, here it is. Here's the solution to that puzzle. And then they send the block out to all the entire network, and it makes a chain. And so then once that block is sent out to the entire network, that starts it makes the chain, and that's how it secures the network.
Right. And currently, if you would put a mirror up to this, or compare, not even a mirror, but you compare this to a bank, I want you to compare decentralized banking system, which you just talked about, where the nodes are, quote, gossiping with each other. Compare that to a central bank.
Yes. Okay. So like a bank that you go to, or if we're going to talk about like central banks, the central banks literally can choose to just modify their own the ledger that they have. They can say we're just going to create $500 billion just literally with a keystroke. And they've admitted that's just how it works. They decide, okay, we're going to inject new money into the system. We're going to put in $500 billion, clickety clack.
And it's not printing money anymore. I think people get that confused a lot.
Yes.
Like, it's not physical paper that's being added to the system. There might be a small percentage of it is, but it's literally just like click of a button that happens.
Yes. And see, and that's the thing, is that most money today, most dollars, is actually digital. I think it's something like 90% of dollars are actually digital. And if you think about in your own life, like, most people don't use cash today. Like, if you're going to send your friend money, you might use Venmo. If you're not using crypto, you might use Venmo. Or if you're going to go to the gas station, buy a pack of bubble gum or whatever, you're going to pay with a credit card. And so this transaction or this interaction of exchange of money is digital today. And so now the leap from that to crypto is much easier than in a world before that was mostly cash-based.
And so we have, basically, you've got the central banks who can create money at will, which is what we talked about.
Yes.
And like, ever since we've got off the gold standard, that's just been going haywire, which we spoke lightly about earlier. So you have the central banks and they can basically, they are the third party that you and another individual, quote, check in with, right? In order to make that transaction legitimate, right? They're the ones that are validating that transaction. Is that a fair way of saying that?
Not quite, not
Okay.
quite. So the central banks, they're responsible for actually just creating the money and then putting it in the system.
So maybe the regional banks is who I was referring to.
Yes, then the regional banks and like card processors like MasterCard or Visa will then say, this transaction's good or this transaction's bad. And that's how that works. But the thing with the central banks is, again, it's really important to understand that this policy with central banks is dictated by people, right? Just on the whims of what's happening in society at that moment in time. And whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, that's okay. But we can look at the result of what's happening in the world today. The inflation numbers just came out yesterday, and it was 7.9%, the highest in 40 years.
Yep.
And what's crazy about this is that you cannot predict how much dollars are going to be in the system in 5 or 10 years. But what's really cool about Bitcoin is that it has a fixed supply that is distributed over decades, and it stops in, I think, the year 2140. And each year you can predict how much Bitcoin, like 20 years from now, how much Bitcoin is going to be in existence. In 40 years from now, how much Bitcoin is going to be in existence.
It's 21 million.
Yes, 21
minus
million.
What was lost at Mount Gox.
Right.
Right? Like 21 million. So like, think about that, guys. You've got one bank over here, central banks over here that are creating more money and basically allowing the value to be, like inflation's happening right now. Mm-hmm. And then on the other side of that, you have basically a fixed amount where the value can only go up from there. And so I want you to continue talking a little bit more about that. You were on a roll. So.
Yeah. So that's assuming that people continue to believe that because of the properties that the Bitcoin blockchain offers, they continue to see value in that. So people think of Bitcoin right now mostly as a store of value or the new digital gold. That's how a lot of people are thinking about Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. But there's some areas in the world like El Salvador where they've made Bitcoin legal tender. Mm-hmm. And so by making Bitcoin legal tender, what they're saying is that for all businesses that are in El Salvador, they have to accept Bitcoin for a medium of exchange or for the services of goods or services. Now, legal tender laws aside, like in the morality of saying you have to accept it, that's a different issue. I actually don't agree with that kind of stance. But the idea, though, for our country to say that we're going to embrace this technology as legal tender is game changing. And they were the first country to do that, and still the only country today that says that Bitcoin is legal tender. But it's cool. You can go there and you can buy your coffee with Starbucks, or your Starbucks coffee with Bitcoin, your McDonald's burger with Bitcoin. Like it's being used there.
And what do you believe the impact is going to be on their government? And I don't just mean long term. I mean like in the short term spikes and valleys.
I think short term. I mean, to be honest about it, I think it's going to be tough short term because of the volatility of Bitcoin. It makes it harder short term as a medium of exchange. Now, a long-term store of value, if we look historically at Bitcoin, we can see that, it's the best performing asset over the last 10 years. Mm-hmm. But short term, if you're a person that has, a taco stand or banana shop or whatever it is, right? And you're taking the Bitcoin and you hold that Bitcoin. If that Bitcoin drops 30%, that can have a negative impact upon your business. Mm-hmm. So as long as if the country short term has easy ways for people to protect that value short term, I think it's okay. But short term, just to be honest about it, I think it can be troublesome in the short term. Right. But when you pioneer a new initiative, there's gonna be a lot of bumps in the road. Mm-hmm. And long term, it's still a good thing. But a person can't believe that their government currency is going to be any safer. Because, for example, if you were a Russian citizen 3 weeks ago, you would have been like, if I have my money in rubles in a bank account, like I'm okay. Good. But we know how that ends right now is that your rubles have fallen 90%. And that just devastates the population.
Yeah, incredible. And look what's been happening with people sending Bitcoin to the Ukraine. Mm-hmm. Like people right now are, like you said, for right, wrong, indifferent, they're sending money And how much money? Do you know how much money's been sent over?
Yeah. So this was really cool. The Ukraine Telegram, not Telegram, Twitter. They posted cryptocurrency addresses, Bitcoin, Ethereum on Twitter, and they've received over $100 million from people all over the world to fund their defense from Russia, which is incredible. It's incredible. That's an incredible use of technology to crowdsource defense. It is really cool to see.
And now let's, regardless of your opinion on things in Canada, let's compare and contrast that to a company that was utilizing, I believe what was the company that was actually helping with like crowdfunding that shut down the truckers?
Yes, it was crowdfunding. So it was GoFundMe.
GoFundMe.
Yes.
Compare that. You've got hard cash, right?
GoFundMe. So these truckers in Canada and the people that were working with the truckers said, hey, let's use GoFundMe to help these truckers, I don't know, get a good night's sleep or food or whatever, fuel, whatever, like all the things they need for their protest. And the Canadian government goes to GoFundMe, which GoFundMe is not even a Canadian company to my knowledge.
Where is it based out of? Do you know?
I think it's a U.S. company in San Francisco.
In San Francisco.
Yeah. And the Canadian government goes to them and says, hey, we don't like that you're doing this. Please shut it off. And then GoFundMe just says, sure, okay. And then they all, even worse, they say, where would you like us to give the money to? And then GoFundMe initially said that they were going to give the money to some other organization as opposed to at least refunding the money back to the people that donated. And so that just made it worse. That made it worse because obviously if you donated $100, $200 to this cause and then the company's like, nah, we're going to take it and we're going to give it to somebody else, you're going to be pissed off.
That is a prime example of what it looks like to be half decentralized. Mm-hmm. You have all these people who are making individual decisions. They have their own money staked towards something that they care about, but they had to check in with someone first. And that check-in was somebody that was the conversion of value from US dollars into what's going on with GoFundMe.
Yep. Well, it's worse than that, though, because then the Canadian government, they invoked what was called the Emergencies Act, and they did that, I think, for the first time in, I don't know, decades, they did this. And they said that anybody that has donated to this cause, we're gonna shut you off from the banking system. So they weaponized the financial system against their own people. And so there was I read this story about this woman and her family, and she has this gelato shop. And she's not a part of the trucking situation. She just has a heart, and she's like, I was thinking about these truckers at night, and they're sleeping in the cold trucks, and I just wanted to help. I just thought maybe if I donate a couple $100, I could maybe help the cause. And the Canadian government says, no, now you're off the financial system.
Unreal.
Which is, in today's world, if you get your bank account shut down, in today's world, you can't pay your rent, you can't pay your utility bills. That is disruptive to your life and actually being a human being.
That makes you want to bury money in the backyard.
Yeah, it's crazy.
That's insane. And obviously invest into some sort of a store of value cryptocurrency.
Well, it gets people to think like, wait a second. If they have this kind of control over my life, and let's remember here that people think of Canadian as a modern Western democracy, right? And when you think about Western democracy, you think about due process. You think about, to respect Western democracy and what it offers, you think about like, we have a court system, we have the executive, and we have the legislative branch. We have all these different branches that have these checks and balances. And I know in Canada it's slightly different, but you still roughly, as a Western democracy, you have these values. And so if there's somebody that has committed a crime in Western democracies, we have all socially agreed that we say, okay, that person has committed a crime, we're going to charge them with a crime, and then we're going to have due process. We're going to take them to a court of law, and we're going to have them be judged fairly by their peers, and we're going to have a case. Mm-hmm. And the government sidestepped all of that and said, no, we're going to shut you off. That's the problem and like you think about that kind of thing in different other countries.
Yeah. Or in a movie, right? Like in a time, a different time, different place.
Yeah. You don't think about that in Western democracies where we value the like I said, having due process and the democratic values of freedom. and innocent until proven guilty.
Right.
And they completely sidestepped all of that. And they did it. They did it because they were afraid, but I think it was a short-term solution because I'm concerned it's gonna backfire.
Massively.
Because I value Western democracies and I want to maintain the integrity of our democracies. And so I think what's happened now is a lot of people around the world have said, wait a second. If the government can just shut me out of the banking system, I don't feel like I need, especially since we're not in a cash-based world anymore,
Right.
I have to wonder, are there alternatives? Is there something else that I can seek to help me in my life, to protect myself in case my own government decides that they're going to shut me off?
Yeah, man, that's got to be raising a lot of questions right now for folks. And I think that I talked to my friend about this a few days ago. It's just expediting this process. And
it is.
It's expediting the process of, and another thing, censorship. You can look at that as a form of censorship. Mm-hmm. Look at what's happening to Joe Rogan right now on Spotify.
Yes.
When Joe Rogan likely moves to some sort of a Web3 sort of format, and I would love you to dive in and give your explanation of Web3 because you're an engineer and you're way smarter than me. I want to talk about that, but just imagine what happens when people start basically going directly to their customers and they're not utilizing Web2 platforms like Facebook, like Spotify, like even Google for that matter, to find what they need to transact how they want to transact or listen to what they want to listen to. So that brings us into our next conversation, which I know we're probably going to get cut short on. But I want you to give us an introduction into what is decentralization, Web3, and let's just start with a 101 version of that for people who have no idea what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so decentralization can definitely be a muddy concept, but decentralization is, I think like Bitcoin as an example is a good example of a decentralized system. And what it essentially means is that it's a rule or consensus amongst multiple people. But again, some key properties to that is that nobody can stop me from participating in that system. Nobody can say, you can't because we don't like what you believe, we don't like what you look like, we don't like how you think, you cannot participate anymore. It doesn't matter. As long as I hold the token is the key that gives me access. So in the case of Bitcoin is the token for the Bitcoin network. Mm-hmm. It's unfortunate they're named kind of the same thing, so that makes it kind of confusing. But as long as I hold Bitcoin, the currency, I can participate in the Bitcoin network. And because of that, again, that permissionless invitation to me to participate in that network, and then the consensus of all of these different, the groups that I mentioned earlier, there's the nodes, there's the miners, the consensus of these groups allows this whole harmonious ecosystem so that no one person controls it. And that's what makes it so beautiful, that anybody can participate and a group of people that participate can have that ownership.
Right. And which brings us into the next term that I would like to kind of discuss, which is DAOs, decentralized autonomous organization. So give us a 10,000 foot view of what is a DAO and how is that going to affect Web3?
Yeah, so let's take a step back and talk about, let me touch on Web3 first, then we'll get to DAO. So people think Web3, that must mean that there was a Web2 and a Web1.
Yep.
So Web1 early days was just the idea of publishing to the internet. In the early days of the internet, you just had a bunch of academics that they could publish. And then along came, newspapers deciding, I can publish the news online. And so it was just more about publishing, okay? Web 2 came along and said, well, let's actually make it so not only do we have all this publishing, but let's make it so that people can publish and connect with each other. And so that's where we saw the rise of social networks, Facebook, Twitter. These are prime examples of Web 2 companies.
Right.
Web 3, it's still very early, but the concept is not only about publishing and socializing. Now it's also about ownership. So in the Web 2 world, like Twitter, anybody or Facebook, anybody can use Twitter or Facebook for free, okay? But there's a downside to that. You know, they're not just providing this service for free because they're nice people over at Facebook and Twitter HQ. And maybe they are, maybe they're not, but that's not what they're doing. They run a business. They've got to make money. So how are they making money? They're making money by saying, this is Bob Smith in Arkansas. Bob Smith in Arkansas likes, you know, hamburgers, likes the Dallas Cowboys, and is into those sorts of things. So then advertisers can be like, I'm selling you know, these new shoes or whatever. I'm selling this video game or whatever. Get me all the people that like, you know, these teams or these games, these PlayStations or whatever. And then they pay Facebook for essentially your eyeballs, for your viewership. So that's Web 2. Now Web 3 comes along and says, no, let's imagine, this hasn't happened yet, but let's imagine a world where Twitter is completely decentralized and there's no advertisers that are paying for these eyeballs of Twitter or Facebook. But let's say that the participants in Facebook or Twitter are the ones that are actually making money in this whole ecosystem. And by doing that, we're going to give them a token into this Web3 network, which we can talk about DAOs in just a minute. Yeah. But in this Web3 network. So here you are is like, let's say, you know, let's take Twitter again as an example. You know, if a person has 1 million followers on Twitter, like that's a big following.
Huge. Right?
But on Twitter today, if you have 1 million followers, you don't get paid anything for that. Twitter doesn't pay you anything for that. Like, and so if you had a decentralized Twitter on Web3 and you had 1 million followers, you would get paid for the 1 million followers consuming the content and participating in the ecosystem. So at a high level, that's what that means. But it has another interesting property that is important for us to talk about. So in the Web 2 world, rightly or wrongly, Twitter said to an acting president, Donald Trump, we're going to remove you from Twitter, rightly or wrongly, right? It is their, I believe that it's Twitter's right to be able to say who can be on their platform, right? But again, for the democracy, was that a good thing to have a standing president removed from Twitter? I don't know, a person could debate that all along. But in a Web3 world, something like that would not be possible.
No, it's not even in the realm of possibility.
Right.
Because that individual owns that following because of what they are providing to the ecosystem, which is the number one currency inside of that, which is value. People actually bringing value, comedic value. It's probably him. Disruption value, educational value. Entertainment value, all of these things. And they talked about artists using non-fungible tokens. We'll come back and talk about that another time. But people that are going to be bringing value to the world in the next 10 years will dominate Web3.
Yes.
If they embrace the technology.
Yes. And the technology is still really early. So a lot of the Web3 things that we're seeing today are still very focused on cryptocurrency. So to give an example of that, there are these platforms online that are all built on these blockchains, and it allows people to take loans and earn money. So you can imagine a platform where you go in, you're like, I'm gonna deposit my Bitcoin, and I'm gonna earn some interest on that. And so there's some platforms that allow people to take there's these they're called stable coins. And so it's a dollar equivalent as a cryptocurrency, tokenized as a cryptocurrency. And there's some platforms that allow people to earn anywhere from 5, 10, even 20%. And people are pooling money into these platforms, and they're taking loans. Now, I'm not going to say there's not risk here. There's risk. I mean, we're talking about this new technology. We're talking about smart contracts, which is a whole nother can of worms. And these things get hacked too. So it's very, very early. But eventually an ecosystem will emerge for people to do things where they have full ownership, full control, like of their audience and of the content that they create and publish.
Right. And that gets into the NFT space, non-fungible tokens, smart contracts, which I don't know if you heard this, but Wyoming is actually like, I think one of the first people to start doing smart contracts with their real estate, which is super cool.
No, I did not hear that with their real estate. Wow.
Yeah. And you guys have probably heard this before, that someday we're going to be able to buy a house with a click of a button, and that will truly happen. It won't be buy a house, wait 5 days, talk to a realtor, talk to the title company, talk to your whoever. It literally will be within minutes you will own the house.
Yes.
And in order for that to happen, first of all, it has to happen on a blockchain, on Web3, within the Web3 world. And the only way to make that happen is to have agreements between likely tokens and people through smart contracts.
Yeah, absolutely. And anybody that's purchased a house before knows how much of a pain it is, especially like the closing day of all the paperwork that you have to sign, the loan process. It is painful. And this can be simplified long-term in a world of Web3 and a world of blockchains.
Super. We have so much to talk about yet. I have tons of questions I haven't even asked, but let's end with just give me like a 10,000 foot view of a DAO, so that at least people can start researching it and they can start to like familiarize themselves with it, because in 5 years, like they're going to take over businesses.
Yes.
Like 5-10 years, like DAOs will literally be taking that over. So I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yep. So a DAO, as you mentioned, stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization. And so what a DAO is, it's a way for a group of people anywhere in the world to come together, and this is all done on Web3, on blockchains with smart contracts. And they can come together and they can say, hey, we want to solve a problem, whatever it is. We're going to work together and we're going to build this project. Maybe it's a trading engine, or we're going to do something else. Recently, we saw something really cool. There was a DAO called Constitution DAO. And this allowed a group of people all over the world to say, we would like to buy one of the copies, the original copies of the U.S. Constitution.
Yeah.
And so what they did is they created a thing called Constitution DAO, and they created the smart contract, and everybody pooled their money in, and they bid on the actual auction. They bid, I don't remember the bid, but they lost. They lost by some hedge fund manager by a little bit, but they raised to buy the Constitution. I don't know. I think it was like $70 million or something like that. It was just a large sum of money. And then once they lost, they gave the money back. But still, it was a group of people that were like, hey, we want to buy this copy of the Constitution. Let's pool our money together and let's do this. So what's critical and key though is that it allows people from all over the world, and you can do it in a smart contract, and then you issue these tokens to vote on different initiatives. And that's how it's governed. It's called decentralized governance. And unlike with a company where you have the CEO and you have the C-suite that decide rules, the DAO has people posting initiatives, submitting initiatives for consideration, and then people that own tokens can then vote on these different initiatives. So it's really cool, and it is going to change the world.
Why I mentioned my comment about how I think that DAOs are going to take over in a serious way in the business world is that when you have essentially it's fractionalized ownership over the outcome of the company. If you own common stock of a company, you may receive some of the benefits of that stock and also deal with some of the losses with that stock. But rarely as a micro shareholder do you have any opportunity to affect change or affect any sort of decisions that are made from the top down. And so what that's doing, from my understanding, and like this is super early, guys. So like we're talking about something that really doesn't quite exist yet. From my understanding of this is that it's going to allow people, just like when they were voting with their money to send money to the Ukraine, just like they were voting with their money to help out truckers in Canada, they're going to be able to affect change on not just sending money, but literally building businesses, doing charities, whatever, but deciding as a group for group consensus.
Yes, absolutely. So in that scenario, you can imagine a person that maybe just has a very small portion of those overall tokens. They can submit for proposal whatever initiative it is, and then the DAO as a whole has to vote on that proposal.
Yeah.
And so that does allow a person to affect change in that way that you had described.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
Dude, where can people get a hold of you? We've reached our time limit today. Where can people get a hold of you, and what's the best way to buy to get on Exodus for the application? Because I want to make sure we're driving people to that. And just give out your credentials too.
Yep. Twitter.com/JP Richardson is the best way to find me directly. And then if you go to Exodus.com, you can just download Exodus from there, or if you search for Exodus from the App Store on the iPhone or Google.
Yeah. Awesome. And talk about really quickly too, I know hard storage, like cold storage is a really important topic right now as things are getting crazy. Talk about the cold storage aspect of Exodus too, because I think that's super cool.
Yeah, so we work with a platform called Trezor. So if you go to exodus.com/Trezor, you'll see that you can buy a Trezor hardware wallet. And what this allows you to do is plug the Trezor into your computer, and Exodus will work with this. And the benefit of the Trezor is that the access to your wallet, the private keys as they're called, is actually stored on that device. So this means that if your computer gets compromised with a virus, you don't have to worry about your money being stolen from you. Where if you don't have a hardware wallet, that can be a risk of loss of money there. So the Trezor can protect you in that way.
Gotcha. And you guys work directly with Trezor to make sure that all of that stuff works seamlessly together.
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, dude, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah.
I hope the first of many. I think we're going to do an entire series on this because there's
awesome.
so much to unpack.
Oh, gosh. Yes.
So I hope you guys have really enjoyed this huge note-taking episode for everybody, I'm sure. You can find us at Life of Landon on Instagram, and just hit us up at Grindstone if you guys are looking to start a podcast. You want a show like this so you can have awesome guests like JP on your show. We'll help you take that podcast from day one, day zero, all the way to helping you launch your first show. And then from there on, we'll also help you out. So thanks for tuning in as always. Leave us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts and keep striking.